National Institute of Health is a class of drug used to relieve pain. Opioid dependency is a physical and psychological reliance on opioids found in certain prescriptions, in pain medications, and even illegal substances. Also, medical marijuana is using the whole, unprocessed version of the plant to treat symptoms of illnesses and other conditions. So let's put some context around these key terms. In 1996, California became the first state to legalize medical marijuana. Since then, 32 states have followed with similar legislation, including Arizona in 2011 and Oklahoma in 2018. The opioid epidemic seems to follow a similar timeline to this legislation of medical marijuana. And the National Institute on Drug Abuse estimates that more than 130 Americans die every day from opioid drug overdose, and that is the #1 cause of injury-related death in our nation. So this just shows how it's such a significant impact and has an impact in our everyday lives. So why is my research important? I hoped to justify the legalization of medical marijuana and show that it can help to reduce the number of deaths, opioid deaths, in our nation, and to define ways to mitigate these issues related to the legalization of medical marijuana. A study produced by the American Journal of Public Health in 2016 wanted to assess the relationship between medical marijuana laws and the opioid positive tests among fatally injured drivers. So in this study, June H. Kim of the Department of Epidemiology at Columbia University performed some statistical treatments to identify and selected 18 states to see if there was a significant impact in the reduction of opioid positivity. When he looked at the 18 randomly selected states, he found no overall correlation between these two events. However, he took a step further in his research and performed an age-stratified analysis, which allowed him to determine that the 21 to 40-year-old age group did show a significant reduction in opioid positivity. This led him to the conclusion that this younger age group did show an association with medical marijuana legislation. Another key study that helped guide my initial research process was from the Journal of American Medical Association. In this study, a group of authors from the University of Georgia wanted to assess the relationship between medical marijuana laws and the prescribing of opioids in the Medicare Part D population. So this population they were looking at was extremely older than the previous study I mentioned before. And they found that there was a significant relationship between legal states with operational medical marijuana laws and a fewer number of prescriptions being written in the Medicare Part D population. So both of these studies helped me to develop my question. In light of the opioid epidemic and the passage of Oklahoma State Question 788, which legalized medical marijuana, and using Arizona as a case study, what policies and practices should Oklahoma adopt to maximize this reduction in opioid dependency? My initial hypothesis was that legalizing medical marijuana would have a reduction in opioid use and the number of overdoses. The idea behind this thought is that more doctors would be prescribing medical marijuana and substituting this prescription for patients they previously prescribed opioids to help take a step further to mitigate the opioid epidemic in our nation. So I chose to conduct a correlational study, which is a non-experimental method in which a researcher identifies an association between two variables. The two variables in my study are opioid overdoses and the legalization of medical marijuana. So I collected my data from several databases on the Arizona Department of Health's website. As for opioids, the first data set available to me was in June of 2017. I then recorded the total number of opioid overdoses from June until December for both 2017 and 2018, for the drugs heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, benzodiazepine, oxycodone, and fentanyl. Once I compiled all of this data into a spreadsheet, I then began my process of calculating a two-sample t-test for means. I first had to outline my null hypothesis, which represents a statement of no change between the two populations in question. My population 1 was opioid overdoses in 2017, and then my population 2 was opioid overdoses in 2018. So I formulated the null hypothesis that population 1 would equal population 2. The null hypothesis must be rejected in order for my correlation to be considered statistically significant between these two events. In order to do this, I had to first designate a level for alpha, which helps determine the level of significance. In this study, I chose 0.05 as my alpha level, which is the most common threshold for research in this type of area. So with this level of alpha, the p-values I calculate for my two-sample t-test must be less than 0.05 in order for me to be able to reject my null hypothesis. And the hypothesis I hoped to prove was my alternate hypothesis, which was there was a decrease from 2017 to 2018 in overall opioid overdoses, meaning that as the years passed since this medical marijuana was put in, legislation was put into place, fewer people were starting to use opioids. Then to analyze and determine the trends in medical marijuana usage in Arizona, I collected and aggregated my data from the annual and monthly reports from 2011 to 2018, and then compiled all of this information into a spreadsheet, which now enabled me to have a more holistic view of this data. I focused mainly on the active medical marijuana card holders within Arizona, specifically their gender, age, and the different diagnoses associated with the card that they were issued. Once all this data was compiled, I created segmented bar graphs to see the overall trends in the prescription of these issued cards, which allowed me to then calculate some standard error bars. And the reason for choosing this method is because it was the most appropriate method for my question. So this table shows the results of my calculated p-values for my two-sample t-test for means. And as you can see, all of these values are significantly high considering a p-value is between 0 and 1. So because these values were all greater than 0.05, I was unable to reject my null hypothesis. And I had to come to the conclusion that there was not enough evidence to suggest a decrease in opioids from 2017 into 2018. So this next set of tables shows the mean value of opioids from 2017 to 2018 for both males and females. And as you can see, even just from year to year, the males have an extremely higher use of opioids overall, and this is the mean number of overdoses. This next chart shows the trends in medical marijuana usage in Arizona from 2011 all the way to 2018 on the right. And the different colors represent the different diagnoses in which these cards were associated with. And the category which I focused most heavily on was the purple category, which represents chronic pain. And overall, this increased by 15% over this 8-year period. So for opioids, my initial hypothesis did not align with the statistical treatments and calculations that I did perform. And so ultimately, I was not able to suggest that there was evidence to show a decrease in opioids as the number of people who were using medical marijuana in this state ultimately increased. While the mean of 3 out of the 6 drugs decreased overall in the female category for opioids, the male population had an average increase of 3 overdoses per for 2017 to 2018 for all 6 drugs. As for medical marijuana, there was a significant increase in the number of active cardholders, which is expected in a state that has legalized medical marijuana. In 2011, Arizona had 13,178 active cardholders, which grew to a whopping 188,935 people in just this short 8-year period. Also, the reason for our diagnosis shifted and doctors started prescribing more medical marijuana cards for people who complained of chronic pain. And this is the largest percentage of the categories looked into, and it increased by 15%. So there were some limitations to the research that I conducted. And ultimately, one of the major limitations that created a challenge was the amount of available data. So initially, when I started this research process, I hoped to look into the trends of the before and after the legalization of medical marijuana to assess the ultimate impact that this legislation had. However, Arizona only started publishing this data on their databases in 2011. This lack of data ultimately shifted my initial research's focus. Also, in 2017, Governor Ducey declared an emergency of the opioid. He signed a declaration of emergency, which was to address the growing opioid problem in this state. And so that is one of the major reasons why June of 2017 was the first data entry for the Department of Health's website. So, my conclusion ultimately lies on a series of several facts. First of all, the number of medical marijuana cardholders increased in Arizona by 93% in the 8-year period, and also chronic pain diagnosed by 15%. So it makes sense that when a state legalizes medical marijuana, we are going to see this increase in upward trend in the number of cards being issued. However, what was not taken into account for in this research process was that people are addicted to opioids. They are unwilling and unable to make this substitution to medical marijuana, and therefore, this is why I ultimately believe the legislation of medical marijuana had little or no impact on the reduction of opioids in this state. Another fact that I uncovered was that males have a higher use of opioids than females for both illegal and prescription drugs. So it is clear that by legalizing medical marijuana in the state of Arizona, we are only providing a new avenue for these addicts. These doctors are not helping those who are already addicted to opioids. They're just increasing the number of patients that they're prescribing chronic pain diagnoses for, and ultimately furthering their drug arsenal and furthering the use of opioids in the state, which is not helping the opioid epidemic in our nation. So it is in my opinion that we must start with the physician. States must start looking at the person who is prescribing these opioids to the patient. Arizona only requires 3 continuing medical education hours per year dealing on the topic of opioids and pain management, as well as prescribing these. However, Oklahoma only requires 1 continuing medical education hour every other year. And this is a significant difference, and we need to establish this change now. In a 50-state policy review by the state of Arizona, they recommend 5 continuing medical education hours relating to these opioids for each physician per year. And they also encourage the use of free state-sponsored websites, which would enable these physicians to access this data more easily. I recommend that Oklahoma should increase the number of mandatory credit hours to 4 per year to account for their busy schedules in their everyday lives. And also we need to increase the accessibility of this data to those and put it on our state-sponsored website and our State of Health website, which is extremely outdated. And we can also give physicians who fulfill these requirements incentives to make them more willing to help with this process. So further research, what else can be done and what is the next step that we need to be taking? The existing data we have is new, so we still need to continue and collect this data and focus on this trend. However, as a nation, we must look at these 50 states individually and identify which one is doing the best job. What are they doing differently? Have they passed different legislation? Do they have a different culture that is prominent in their state? And ultimately, what is the root cause of this solution? And so these are my preferences. And then I would like to thank Devin Wilcox, my mentor, for helping with this process, and also Mr. Horton.
Okay. Well done. We'll go ahead and let you start with questions.
Sounds good. So, Kate, what unanticipated turn did you encounter as your research progressed, and what would you attribute as a reason for that change in direction?
So initially, I would have loved to look at the state of Oklahoma. However, our data is very outdated, and the only thing I could find for opioids was dated in 2008. In medicine, we need to keep up with this trend, so my data needed to be recent, and that is why I shifted to look at the state of Arizona, because they started legalizing medical marijuana, and I was able to see the similar trend since Oklahoma also passed a legislation for medical marijuana.
So what would you deem your most important source of information, and why?
Okay, so the most important source of information for me was a study by Gene Kim, and that was because it was similar to my research, which he found no significant correlation when looking at the states as a whole. However, he took that step further and he looked at the ages, and I found that same thing when I was looking at Arizona as a whole, and then I went further and looked at males versus females, and then I found a stronger correlation there.
So kind of taking those two questions and mashing them together a little bit, over your 6 to 8 months of research here, what additional questions emerged, either through your reading of materials, through the research you conducted, the data sets you looked at, what additional questions emerged, and based on this experience, what advice would you give in relation to those questions for anyone else that researched?
Yes, so some questions that emerged during my research was, why are we in this problem now, and what caused the roots, what caused us to be in this big of a hole? And also, what type of legislation or what type of solution might we enact in order to take a step to mitigate this epidemic in our nation? And some advice that I would give to a fellow researcher is to have a narrow focus in order to be able to find a more significant correlation, because the opioid epidemic is a national issue and it's very broad in its reach.
Thanks, Kate. That's all I have.
Mr. Wilcox, you have any questions?
Yeah, so Kate, why did you choose the topic is kind of the biggest question on it.
Okay, so I chose to focus on opioids because in my future career plans, I plan on becoming a physician, and I would love to get back to Oklahoma and practice. And by able to do this, I want to be able to help my fellow community and be able to find a solution for this problem.
Awesome. So just one more. You gave a couple of suggestions with the increasing in the continued education hours. What other suggestions, just in your scope of the project, would you suggest that could be implemented to maybe start to mitigate the problem?
So another suggestion that I have would be to increase the number of opioid becoming physicians and going to practice medicine are aware of this issue and aware of how to take steps to reducing this epidemic.
Couple questions. First of all, toward the end of it, when you're recommending going further, you talked about other states and some data out there. Throughout the course of your research, did you come across information about rates of opioid overdoses and what state, how those are ranked statewide? I mean, obviously nationwide, looking at 2017 being the earliest data. Where are some of the states where you find the lowest opioid overdoses?
Some of the states with the lowest opioid overdoses would probably be in states with more strict legislation and more liberal politics. So like Florida.
Well, the reason I'm asking, obviously,
I didn't really specifically look into other states.
no, and I know you and I talked about doing the case study, and you did everything. I mean, I'm gonna have lots of confidence here in a second. But my question is, you're looking at a very short period, 2017, 2018, yet it's been legal in Arizona since 2011. Why not do the more longitudinal study and see if some of those early impacts were felt 5, 6, 7 years ago? But I guess, I mean, that's something you didn't do. So the other way is, as a hypothesis, would you expect to see those states that have the lower opioid overdoses, states with legalized marijuana for medical purposes, or do you think it'd be some other factor?
I personally do not believe that the legislation of medical marijuana does have an impact, only because like we are addicted to opioids, and so a lot of these people do not want to make the switch. It's not because legislation hasn't been passed, it's their personal choice.
And then finally, last question for you. Through the course of the research, what role did your mentor play in the process, and in what way was it beneficial, particularly as it relates to the method?
Yes, so my mentor was very helpful, and especially in the initial processes of my findings, and he would help me to revise my method, and he ultimately suggested that I take a more narrow focus and look specifically at a smaller data set because it is very large.
So we get this on tape. One of the best descriptions of the method we've seen so far this year. Well done.
Thank you.
Well done.